picture this. It's a sweltering summer day in 1984 in Argus, Indiana.
Okay.
Kids are out playing, neighbors are chatting over their fences, and life seems, well, pretty normal.
Yeah.
But then a young mother, Darlene Hulse, vanishes from her home,
Oh, wow.
just gone in
Yeah.
broad daylight. And for almost 40 years, her murder has remained unsolved.
Hmm.
So today, we're going to dive deep into this case.
Okay.
We've got stacks of police reports, witness statements, and expert opinions to sift through.
Wow.
Hopefully we can untangle this web and uncover the truth about what happened to Darlene. Welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you here to help us make sense of all of this.
Thanks for having me. What really gets me about this case is how these little, almost insignificant details can become huge over time.
Oh, interesting.
We're going to see how a simple mix-up, a buried bus, and even a fractured bone could be the key to cracking this decades-old puzzle. It's fascinating, really.
Okay, so right off the bat, things get a little complicated. There was confusion early on about the suspects, like a mix-up between the Lemon and Parson families.
Right, and that really highlights how crucial accuracy is in any investigation.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Especially when you're dealing with something as serious as a homicide. Even tiny errors can snowball, They can derail the whole thing.
Absolutely. So tell me about these Parsons. What made them persons of interest?
Well, they lived close to Darlene and her family, and there were some unsettling things about them.
Like what?
For one, they had a bus buried in their backyard. Not exactly your typical suburban decor, right?
A buried bus. That's definitely odd. But how does that tie into the murder investigation?
Well, the FBI profile suggested that the killer was likely familiar with the area, someone who knew how to dispose of a body discreetly. And this buried bus, a hidden feature only locals would know, certainly fits that description.
Okay, so the Parsons were on the radar. And we know that some of the family members actually fit parts of the FBI's suspect profile.
Exactly. 3 of the brothers, Jay, Daryl, and Mike, each drew attention for different reasons.
In what ways?
Well, Jay was actually interviewed by the police and he even took a polygraph test. Daryl matched the physical description of the suspect. And then there's Mike, the youngest, who reportedly had mental health struggles.
So it sounds like investigators had their hands full trying to sort through all these potential leads. But let's talk about Darlene for a minute.
Sure.
For years, everyone believed she died from blunt force trauma, but that might not be the whole story. Is that right?
You got it. Dr. Bill Smoke, who's a renowned medical expert, took a fresh look at the case years later, and his analysis really changes things. He thinks Darlene's cause of death wasn't blunt force trauma, but strangulation.
Wow, that completely reframes the investigation. What evidence did he base that on?
Well, he pointed to a fractured hyoid bone. That's a bone in the neck, and it was documented in the original autopsy.
Okay.
And a fractured hyoid is a strong indicator of strangulation.
That's a pretty crucial detail that seems to have been missed initially.
It is. And it's not the only significant finding Dr. Smoke made. He also thinks there's evidence that points to a possible sexual assault.
Oh, really?
He points to blood splatter on her underwear, like transfer droplets that indicate the blood dripped onto the fabric from above.
So potentially a sexual assault and strangulation?
Yeah.
This paints a much more disturbing picture than just a random act of violence.
Absolutely.
It seems more like a personal attack, possibly fueled by rage or a need for control.
Exactly. And it raises all these questions about what happened in those final moments before Darlene's death. Was she alive in the car? Was there a struggle? This tiny piece of underwear could have vital DNA evidence, maybe even the killer's.
It makes you wonder how many other cold cases could be solved if we just looked at the evidence with new technology and fresh eyes.
It's an interesting thought for sure, but for now, let's get back to another piece of this puzzle. It came out years later. It involves a witness named Cindy Sears. Now remember, Darlene disappeared in broad daylight. But Cindy came forward saying she saw Darlene alive in a green car with a man who matched the suspect's description.
Wow, that's huge. What exactly did Cindy say she saw?
She said she saw Darlene sitting upright in the passenger seat, not unconscious or slumped over. This suggests Darlene was alive when she was taken from her home, maybe even conscious during part of the journey.
Okay, so that adds another layer of complexity to this case.
Definitely. It also challenges the initial idea that the killer knew the area really well and went straight to the woods where Darlene's body was found.
Oh.
According to Cindy, the car actually turned around, possibly because the driver realized he was being watched.
So if that's true, maybe it wasn't the planned thing. The killer might have been improvising, and that wooded area wasn't the intended destination at all.
Right, and that's where things take a really interesting turn. We start to see how rumors and whispers can lead to unexpected places. We need to talk about Jason, a man who supposedly confessed to killing Darlene while he was drunk at a bar.
Okay, so we have a potential eyewitness putting Darlene in a car, and now a man who allegedly confessed to the crime.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Jason, what we know about him.
Well, bar confessions aren't always reliable.
Sure.
But what's interesting about Jason's is that it wasn't just a one-time thing. There were multiple sources who all told basically the same story, that Jason admitted to the crime.
And what's really unsettling is that Jason fit the profile almost perfectly.
Yeah, like too perfectly, almost. He had a history of violence, a rough past, and, according to some people, a disturbing lack of respect for women. All of that lines up with what the FBI's behavioral analysis predicted, that the perpetrator would be someone motivated by anger, maybe stemming from conflict with a woman in his life.
It sounds like something straight out of a movie.
It does, doesn't it?
And there's another twist, right? Didn't Jason have some connection to Ron, Darlene's husband?
That's right. Investigators found work logs in Darlene's case file that suggest Jason might have been a contract truck driver for the same company Ron worked for. So their paths could have crossed.
So we have a possible motive, a possible confession, and a possible connection to the victim's husband. But I'm guessing it can't be that simple. What about the work logs? Did they give Jason an alibi?
Well, on the surface, yes. The logs put him out of state on the day Darlene was murdered.
Okay.
But here's the catch. They were self-reported, meaning there's a chance they could have been faked.
So the seemingly solid alibi might not be so solid after all. What else makes you question those logs?
Well, when you look at them closely, there are inconsistencies in the mileage and other details that raise some red flags. It just doesn't quite add up.
Okay, that's definitely something to think about. And speaking of suspicious timing, wasn't there something about Jason reporting an injury shortly after Darlene's murder?
Yeah, just a few days after Darlene's murder, Jason told his employer he was hurt, said he strained some muscles and bruised his ribs. And, we know Darlene fought back hard during the attack.
Right.
So it's totally possible her attacker got hurt in the struggle.
Yeah, that timing is definitely suspicious. But couldn't it have just been an accident at work? Is it fair to link it to the murder just because of when it happened?
Good point. We can't say for sure those injuries came from Darlene's attack, but it's definitely something we can't ignore. Makes you wonder, could those be defensive wounds from Darlene fighting back?
Chilling thought. And to make things even weirder, there's a photocopied calendar in the case file. It's got X's marked on 3 specific dates. The day Darlene was murdered, the day Jason said he was injured, and the day he filed the injury report. What are we supposed to make of that?
It's a real head-scratcher. We don't know where that calendar came from or why it was even in the file.
Yeah.
Was it just a detective marking important dates? Was it connected to Jason somehow? It's a piece of this puzzle that's still missing.
So we've got Jason, this potential suspect, with a possible motive, a maybe not so solid alibi, and a suspicious injury. But we also have the Parsons, especially Mike.
Right.
He's still a person of interest. What makes him stand out from his brothers?
Well, Mike was young at the time, lived near Darlene, and according to reports, struggled with mental health. Some people described him as different or strange, and there are even rumors of some disturbing behavior.
I remember reading about a source who saw Mike spending days alone in the woods, acting really erratically. And then there's that story about him supposedly pinning a woman down, intending to assault her until his brother stopped him. It's all very unsettling.
It is. These stories paint a complicated picture of Mike. We have to be careful about rumors, of course.
Oh, absolutely.
But it's important to look at everything, especially when there are so many unanswered questions. But Mike's mental health issues raise some ethical questions, too. How do you get information from someone who might not fully understand what's going on? It's a tough situation.
Very sensitive, for sure. And it doesn't help that we have very little information about Mike from back in 1984. We know he was a patient at a mental health facility, which seems to give him an alibi.
Right.
But the details are vague, and the timing doesn't totally rule him out.
Exactly. The police report from the Bowen Center, the mental health place, says Mike was there from 9 a.m. until 2 a.m. on the day of the murder. But there's a chance that's a typo.
Okay.
It could have been 2 p.m. And even if it's not a typo, there's still time unaccounted for before 9 a.m. and after 2 p.m.
And there's another piece of information that's interesting. Someone said they saw Mike in a hand-painted green car the day before Darlene's murder. He was parked right next to her at a local store. Kind of creepy to think he might have been watching her.
It is, and even though we can't confirm that sighting, it does make you wonder about Mike's motive and what he was doing leading up to Darlene's death.
Right.
Was this a random crime, or did he plan it?
So many possibilities. It reminds us that every detail, every little piece of information could be important. But let's switch gears for a second and talk about the physical evidence. You mentioned Darlene's underwear potentially having DNA on it. What other evidence could give us some answers?
It's frustrating because there's so much evidence that hasn't been tested. Darlene's underwear, the semen sample from the autopsy, even the duct tape if they ever found it, all of that could help identify the killer.
And what about that fingerprint they found on the phone receiver at Darlene's house? It doesn't sound like they ever really looked into that.
That's a missed opportunity for sure. Today's technology can pull DNA from a fingerprint. Every piece of evidence tells a story, and with a case this old, we have to try everything. We have the technology, it just needs to be used. This case needs to be a priority.
It's sad to think that crucial evidence could be sitting in a box somewhere, untested. What about the lack of urgency from the authorities? What can be done to get people focused on this case again?
Darlene's case shows us how important it is to fight for victims, especially in cold cases where time has passed and people have forgotten.
Yeah.
It reminds us that justice delayed is justice denied, and every victim, no matter how long it's been, deserves a real investigation.
Absolutely. And we keep coming back to that buried bus in the Parsons' backyard. It's so bizarre.
I know, right?
It's almost like something out of a movie. Is there anything to suggest it's more than just a weird family thing?
It's definitely intriguing. Investigators thought the killer knew the area and was comfortable hiding a body somewhere secluded.
Right.
Could this buried bus, something only locals would know about, have been a place he was familiar with, a place where he felt safe?
That's a good point.
Hmm.
What if this bus wasn't just a bus? What if it was a place where things happened, where secrets were kept? It sounds like something out of a Stephen King novel.
It's a compelling theory. We know that Mike and his brothers used to dig holes and bury stuff on their property. It's possible that bus holds a clue, some piece of evidence that's been hidden in plain sight all these years.
So we've got a buried bus, a possible hiding spot, and a family full of secrets. But we also have to remember those rumors about Jay confessing.
Yeah.
Didn't someone say Jay admitted to his mom that he'd been accused of Darlene's murder?
That's right. And there's another detail that makes this even more interesting. Jay also supposedly said he couldn't believe anyone would hurt a child. He was talking about the unsolved murder of Brandy Peltz.
Hold on, Brandy Peltz. Wasn't she that young girl who was found murdered in a similar way?
Exactly. And for years, the police didn't think there was any connection between Darlene's case and Brandy's.
Okay.
But if they were both strangled, like Dr. Smoke believes, it makes you think there could be a link.
This opens up a whole new side to the investigation.
It does.
Could these two cases, which everyone thought were unrelated, actually be the work of the same killer?
That's the question, isn't it? And if they are connected, it changes everything.
Wow.
It means we could be dealing with someone who became more violent over time, someone who felt like they could get away with it after murdering Darlene. It's a scary thought.
And it makes getting answers even more important. Darlene's case has been unsolved for too long, and Brandy Peltz's family deserves justice too. What can we do to keep these cases in the public eye? How do we stop them from being forgotten?
These cases remind us that unsolved murders leave a lot of pain and unanswered questions. They affect families, communities, and even the investigators who are trying to find the truth. We have to remember that every unsolved case means that someone out there knows something. Maybe it's a small detail, a conversation they half remember, or an old rumor. But those little bits of information could be what we need to solve the case.
It's amazing how much we've learned in this deep dive. We started with a pile of documents, and now we have all these suspects, conflicting evidence, and questions that have been lingering for decades. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, each one revealing something new and unexpected.
That's the thing about cold cases. Time goes by, memories fade, but the truth is still out there. And sometimes you just need a fresh perspective to see what was hidden all along.
So what does all this mean? It means we can't give up on Darlene or Brandy. It means we have to keep looking for answers, keep asking questions, keep pushing for the truth. Their stories need to be told, their voices need to be heard, and whoever killed them needs to be brought to justice.
Exactly. Justice might be delayed, but it doesn't have to be denied. And for everyone listening, think about what stood out to you, what detail really stuck with you, what question is still in your mind. Sometimes those are the very questions that lead to a breakthrough.
Right. Don't let this be just another true crime story you listen to and forget.
Mm.
These are real people, real families whose lives were changed forever by these horrible events. Their stories need to be remembered, and their search for justice needs our support.
And remember, someone out there knows something. Maybe it's something small, a half-remembered conversation, an old rumor. But those pieces of information could be what we need to finally solve this.
So if you're listening and anything comes to mind, don't hesitate to reach out. You never know, you might have the piece of information that finally brings Darlene and Brandy's families the closure they deserve.
And if you want to learn more, you can find information about Darlene's case and ways to help her family on their website. We'll post a link in the show notes.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
And be sure to tune in to our next episode, where we'll be looking at another fascinating case full of twists, turns, and hopefully a path to the truth.
Until then, keep thinking critically, keep asking questions, and keep believing that justice is worth fighting for, no matter how long it takes.
It just breaks your heart to think about the pain her family must feel, not knowing who took Darlene or why. It's got to be so frustrating.
Absolutely. It's a wound that never really heals. They're left with this emptiness, this huge hole in their lives, and all the unanswered questions just make it worse.
It makes you realize that justice isn't just about catching the killer.
Right.
It's also about giving the family some answers, some closure.
Exactly. Closure helps them start to heal, to move on, to remember Darlene without always having that uncertainty hanging over them.
And in a case like this, where there's still so many questions, closure feels impossible.
It does. But even without all the answers, there's something powerful about acknowledging how much Darlene's loss affected people.
Yeah.
Remembering her as a loving mother, a good friend, someone whose life was tragically cut short.
I think that's one of the most important things we can do.
Yeah.
Keep Darlene's memory alive, tell her story, and fight for the justice she deserves.
That's right. And for those listening, remember that you can help seek justice for Darlene, too. Stay informed, share her story, and support efforts to re-examine the evidence and pursue new leads. We need to hold those responsible accountable.
Sometimes, the smallest bit of information, a tiny detail, can make a huge difference. If you remember anything at all, no matter how small it seems, don't hesitate to speak up.
Even the vaguest memory could be what brings Darlene's family the answers they've been waiting for.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the mystery of Darlene Hulse's murder.
Yeah, thanks for listening. We really appreciate it.
We've explored the twists and turns, the suspects, the evidence, and we hope you'll keep thinking about this case and sharing Darlene's story. Remember, justice is always worth fighting for, no matter how long it takes.